Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're stepping way back in time to unpack one of history's absolute wildest underdog stories. If you're someone who loves strategic brilliance, psychological warfare, and narratives where the odds are just completely stacked against the hero, well, you're in the right place. We're going to look at the story of Gideon, a guy tasked with defending his people from a massive invading force using a strategy that literally defies all conventional military logic. So, let's get into it. Okay, let's dive into this. How exactly do you defeat an enemy whose troops are literally described as being like grasshoppers for multitude? I mean, we're talking about an overwhelming, seemingly infinite sea of enemy soldiers. This is the exact terrifying scenario Gideon, who was also known as Jerubbaal, was facing. He and his people had set up camp beside the well of Harod, while the massive host of the Midianites camped on their north side, right by the hill of Moreh, down in the valley. It's the ultimate David and Goliath setup, right? But on a massive army-wide scale.
Phase 1. The numbers game.
So, the crucial point is this completely counterintuitive twist. Gideon is basically told his army is actually too big. Just think about that for a second. You're facing this endless sea of Midianites, and you are told your own forces are too large. The reasoning God gives him is entirely about human pride. Basically, if Israel won with a big army, they would vaunt themselves, claiming that their own hand had saved them. They'd want to take all the credit. So, a drastic reduction was ordered. The drop in numbers here is absolutely stunning. Gideon starts out with 32,000 men, but following instructions, he makes a super simple proclamation: whoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. And just like that, 22,000 men pack up and leave. Over 2/3 of his entire army just vanishes because of fear, leaving him with only 10,000 men. But guess what? Even 10,000 was still deemed too many. To shrink the army even further, this incredibly specific, almost bizarre sensory test was devised down at the riverbank. The men were literally divided by how they drank the water. On one side, you had those who bowed down on their knees to drink directly from the river. On the other side, you had those who lapped the water with their tongue, like a dog, putting their hand to their mouth to bring the water up. Try to picture that scene. The vast majority of the tired men just dropped straight to their knees to gulp down the water. And this brilliantly illustrates just how extreme this reduction was. Out of the 10,000 men who went down to the water, only a tiny fraction, exactly 300 men, brought their hands to their mouths to lap the water. That's it, just 300 guys. God tells Gideon that it's by these 300 specific men that he will save them and deliver the Midianites into their hand. So Gideon is ordered to send the rest of Israel back to their tents. He keeps only these 300 who grab their provisions and their trumpets, while the massive Midianite camp is just looming right beneath them in the valley.
Which brings us to the next phase, the barley cake dream.
So Gideon is now sitting there with just 300 men. To ease his, let's be honest, very human terror, God tells him to sneak down to the hostile camp in the dead of night with his servant, Phurah. And when they creep up to the outskirts, the sight is terrifying. They're facing this massive coalition: Midianites, Amalekites, and all the children of the east. The source text paints such a vivid, overwhelming picture here. The enemy lies along the valley like grasshoppers from multitude. Even their transport, their camels, are described as being without number, as the sand by the seaside. It is literally an ocean of enemy forces. But while creeping around in the shadows, Gideon overhears this incredibly surreal conversation between two Midianite guards. One guy is telling his comrade about this highly specific, frankly bizarre dream. He says, "Lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the host of Midian, and came unto a tent, and smote it that it fell, and overturned it that the tent lay along." I mean, imagine hearing this. A simple loaf of barley bread rolling down a hill and completely flattening a massive military tent. It sounds crazy, right? But it's the comrade's interpretation of that dream that changes absolutely everything. The second guard immediately replies that this barley cake is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, a man of Israel. He openly admits that God has delivered Midian and the entire host into Gideon's hand. Hearing the enemy themselves vocalize their own impending doom, terrified of a metaphorical piece of bread, completely shifts Gideon's mindset. It sparks absolute faith. He immediately worships right there in the dark, sneaks back to the camp of Israel, wakes up his 300 men, and says, "Arise, for the Lord hath delivered into your hand the host of Midian." That kicks off our tactical phase, the midnight shark. Now, what's really interesting about this setup is Gideon's completely unconventional loadout. He divides his tiny force of 300 into 3 companies of 100 men each. But get this, they aren't armed with traditional weapons for this initial assault. No swords, no spears. Every single man is given a trumpet, an empty clay pitcher, and a burning lamp hidden inside that pitcher. They are bringing musical instruments and pottery to fight an army of grasshoppers. He just tells them, "Look on me and do likewise. As I do, so shall ye do."
They creep to the outside of the enemy camp right at the beginning of the middle watch, and this timing is absolutely critical. The enemy had just newly set the watch, meaning the guards were tired, shifting around, and the camp was fast asleep in pitch blackness. Then the synchronized attack begins. Gideon's men blow the trumpets. They violently smash the clay pitchers they're holding. Suddenly, the hidden lamps are exposed, blazing brightly in their left hands, while their right hands hold the trumpets, just blowing continuously.
And as the dead of night is totally shattered by sudden, blazing light and the deafening crash of shattering pottery and blaring trumpets from every side of the camp, all 300 men scream the battle cry, "The sword of the Lord and of Gideon." The psychological impact of this hitting a sleeping, already nervous camp from 3 different directions at once, it is completely catastrophic.
The contrast of what happens next is just absolute chaos. On one side, Gideon's 300 men don't even charge in. They literally just stand their ground, every man in his place around the camp, blowing those trumpets and holding up the lights. On the other side, the massive Midianite host falls into total blind panic. The text says all the host ran and cried and fled. And in the massive confusion of the dark, the noise, and the sudden lights, God actually set every man's sword against his fellow throughout the entire host. The massive army basically began destroying itself before fleeing into the night.
Let's move to and see how this builds in the final chapter, Aftermath and the Pursuit.
The psychological trap had totally sprung. The enemy was broken, and it was time to press the advantage. The chase really unfolds in 4 geographic phases. First, the terrified host flees toward Bethshitta and Abel Maholah. Second, with the enemy completely on the run, the broader men of Israel, the ones who had been sent away earlier, they now gather out of Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh to join the pursuit. Third, Gideon sends messengers throughout Mount Ephraim, calling them to come down and capture the vital water crossings at Beth-bara and the Jordan River to cut off the enemy's escape route. Finally, the men of Ephraim succeed. They famously capture and execute 2 Midianite princes, Oreb upon the rock Oreb and Zeb at the winepress of Zeb. And that leaves us with this final provocative thought to wrap up our explainer. When you are facing truly impossible odds, does victory actually require overwhelming human strength? Or, as Gideon's tiny army of 300 men holding clay pitchers and torches proved in the dark of that middle watch, does true power sometimes come from stripping away our human pride, leaning fully into faith, and subverting the enemy's expectations entirely? It's a fascinating narrative, and it radically challenges our modern reliance on sheer numbers. Thanks for exploring this amazing piece of history with us today.